Good afternoon. My name is Tom Garrett. I am the Vice President of the International Republican Institute. And we're very happy today to be a co-host to the United States-Indonesia Society on this very interesting, very timely presentation. Let me just tell you one or two things about our institute. Since we were founded in 1983, we've worked in more than 100 countries worldwide, and today we work in 12 nations in Asia. Some of our most interesting programming through the years, though, in Asia has been in Indonesia, where we have worked since 1996. I myself was very fortunate to be the IRI country director in Indonesia from 2000 to 2005, so this is of great interest to me today. Most of IRI's work in Indonesia has been focused on training political parties, working to bring civil society into the political system, and then most recently in strengthening women's involvement in the political process. We had a project funded by USAID to try to train women candidates in the parliamentary elections that took place earlier in the year. And at the moment now, with this major step that's just been taken by Indonesia, we are looking forward to seeing what the future may hold. Indonesia has been a strong partner to us in work in other countries, and we are looking forward to developing that partnership, as well as looking for things we might be able to do in Indonesia as that country moves forward. That's why I think we're so excited at IRI to be hearing from our special guest today. I want to go ahead and just turn this over now to Ambassador Merrill. It's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce him to you. I suspect probably all of you know him quite well. He's no stranger to the region or to this country or to this work. He's been ambassador to Bangladesh. He was director of USAID in Indonesia. He was USAID director for East Asian Affairs. And of course, today he does an exemplary job in bringing US and Indonesian issues together as president of the United States-Indonesia Society. So with that, let me turn it over, Ambassador Merrill.
Roughly 134 million Indonesian voters, roughly equivalent to the number of Americans who voted in our own last presidential election. An impressive, for Indonesia, an impressive 71% voter turnout. Went to the polls July 9th to choose their new president in Indonesia's third direct presidential election. On Tuesday, the Indonesian Election Commission, KPU, declared Jakarta Governor Joko Widodo, Jokowi, the new president of Indonesia, by roughly 53% to 47%, a difference of about 6%. Their announcement followed a closely contested presidential campaign with both candidates, Governor Jokowi and General Prabowo, claiming victory right after the election. General Prabowo's legal team has stated they intend to challenge the process leading to the announced result. Their deadline for doing so is tomorrow. If a challenge is filed, the Constitutional Court must render its decision by August 21st. This is just background for the talk. What can be said about the present state of democracy in Indonesia in 2014, based on the election process, the announced results, and the possible legal challenge process? From what elements of the electorate did Governor Jokowi's support tend to come, and what elements of the electorate tended to give more support to General Prabowo? What did Indonesians themselves cite as their reasons for voting for each candidate? What are their own perceptions of the state of their own democracy? Today, we're privileged to have Ohio State Professor Emeritus Bill Liddle, America's renowned political science expert on Indonesia, one might say legendary, I often say legendary, provide his perspective on Indonesia's 2014 election, the factors that led to each candidate's support, and his perspective on the state of Indonesia's democracy. Bill has a slide presentation, and his talk will be followed by questions and answers. This event is being streamed live and will also be available for website viewing for those that could not make it today. Bill will speak, or try to speak from this podium. As a professor, he tends to want to walk around but we've advised him to try to stay here because of the camera on him. Bill, welcome, please.
Thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here, of course, and delighted to see so many old friends, people who have been following Indonesia in this town or in Indonesia for as long as I have, 50 years or more. But it's also terrific to see so many young people here because Indonesia is now embarking, of course, on a great adventure with the first transfer of power to a directly elected president, from one directly elected president to another, in an era of pretty successful economic development and so forth. Lots of challenges, but also lots of achievements in Indonesia so far. So this is a great time for young people to be following what's happening there, as well as the rest of us to kind of marvel at how far they have come over the last 60 years, in my case, since I first went to Indonesia. I want to start off, let me put my slide up here. I have a slide presentation, but before I do that, I want to start out by focusing for just a moment on what Indonesians have achieved. I mean, we're going to see this more explicitly with some of the slides, but Indonesia has, in fact, conducted successfully democratic elections since 1999. Now, it's done it at the local level as well as the national level, but there have been national elections for parliament and now directly for president starting in 1999. And all of those elections have been conducted in a free and fair way, according to a majority of the Indonesian voters. So the Indonesian people, the Indonesian voters, ex-President Suharto and his military supporters of that day, I used to listen to them quite a lot, tell me that this could never happen, that Indonesians were not ready for democracy and all that kind of thing. But it turned out that they were, at least when Suharto stepped down, because they've done a really good job of creating the institutional foundation for a democracy. So I want to start off by kind of recognizing that. But the second thing that I want to do, and people are going to raise their eyebrows a little bit, is also to recognize or even congratulate Prabowo Subianto, who I thought, I don't want to argue totally free of blemish. I'm going to be talking about the blemishes in a moment. We see a little bit of them on the screen. But I watched all 5 of the debates. And you could see that Prabowo was a man of very high competence, a great deal of knowledge about Indonesian politics, who was, except for those blemishes, certainly prepared to be president of Indonesia. So the contest that we saw in in the debates and so forth was a contest between 2 heavyweights, 2 people who were prepared to take over the leadership of a country of 250 or so million people. So I know Prabowo's history and so forth, so I was watching the election and the campaign and so forth with some of those concerns in my mind that we're going to see in a moment. But in fact, for the most part, Prabowo proved his mettle as a presidential candidate, and I think does credit to the Indonesian political system to this point. We'll see also, David has also begun to talk about what Prabowo is likely to do in the next few days and so on. That's another matter. I just want to recognize right now his campaign, his role in the campaign, and so forth. And then, of course, if I'm going to single out people here, I have to single out Joko Widodo himself, who was an extraordinary figure as the mayor of Solo, who came to everybody's attention, and then became, after almost 2 terms as mayor of Solo, became governor of Jakarta, a post in which he has served for less than 2 years, I think. The kind of wave of support for him has just been amazing in the country. And my collaborator here, Saiful Mujani, ex-student and survey researcher extraordinaire in Indonesia, has said, you really have to get it across to American audiences what a magnificent achievement. He said to me in an email last night, he said, you've got to say this. What an extraordinary achievement this has been for the Indonesian people to elect somebody like Jokowi. This is just an ordinary guy like me, says Saiful, a small town boy, a businessman, the son of a small-scale businessman, not, I think, from slums, as we see sometimes in reports. It's not that kind of poverty-stricken background. But Jokowi is somebody who rose as a very ordinary person in a very ordinary part of Indonesia, and it was through his force of personality and his ability in a democratic era to appeal to so many people at these various levels that has made him president. But he's just an ordinary person. Not an aristocrat, not a general, not anybody from any famous family or anything. And he's president of Indonesia. That's what Saiful said to me. And I think that's right. I think that's right. So I want to be sure that I do convey that. Okay, so now I have a slide presentation. And this is also, in my retirement, a wonderful thing that I get to do is to transmit Saiful Mujani's research findings to large audiences. He was my student at Ohio State, studied survey and work as well as political science, and he has become Indonesia's premier survey researcher. I think I already said that since then. And so we have been working together on a number of projects. And this is data. This is data that was collected by his current organization, which is the Saiful Mujani Research and Consulting organization. This is the frame, this is the structure of what I'm going to be talking about. So I'll start out by talking about some general things about the direction of the country and so forth, and you'll see the similarity or differences with the United States when I do that. The direction of the country, the state of Indonesian democracy, this is all in the minds of Indonesian voters, economic condition, and so forth, before I get into an evaluation of the election process. And then finally, the factors that Saiful and I think have most influenced voters. It was a pretty close race, the closest race by Indonesian standards, 53 to 47%. Americans say, whoa, that's easy. But for them, it was a very close election, and indeed, it looked for a time as though Prabowo was gaining ground, and it was become closer than that, or Prabowo might even have won. So anyway, we're going to look at the factors most influencing the voters. Mainly, I'm not going to go through all of this methodology stuff. I know that turns people off. Me too. I like living in villages rather than doing this stuff. That's why I started in Indonesia. I could live in villages and not do this stuff. But anyway, what most of this data is from exit polls. That is to say, we had researchers in 2,000 polling places across the country, very scientifically done, so we're very sure of the reliability of the results. Survey researchers in 2,000 polling places interviewing individuals. So this is a survey. This is not the quick count. The quick count, I have some results from the quick count later on. But we did a lot of quick counts too. Various survey organizations did quick counts. But quick count is a collecting of the actual data from the polling place. So the vote, how many people voted for Prabowo, how many voted for Jokowi in a particular polling place, that's the quick count. But what we did was to pick one voter per polling place for 2,000 polling places, and then sit them down for a fairly extensive interview, as you'll see from the number of questions. So that's what this is based upon, the exit polls, not the quick count by and large. Okay, so I said we're going to have a number of setting the stage slides about what the status of Indonesian democracy is. I don't know what President Obama's figures are on this, but they are not this. They are not this. It's been a long time. I think maybe since President Obama was reelected, and his numbers were fairly high, the direction the country was going in, maybe, but never as high as this. Never as high as this. And so Indonesian voters in our exit poll are asked, what is the direction in which the country is going? This is a standard survey question around the world. And the answer is 90% say it's going just great. It's going in the right direction. Okay, on democracy, here again, Suharto and all of those New Order people who said Indonesia couldn't be a democracy, we know that Indonesians understand, because we have other questions too in other polls, we know Indonesians understand what democracy means. It's about elections and so forth, competition among parties. And we ask them what do they think about democracy. 58% say democracy is best. Okay, so in principle, Indonesians support democracy. democratic practice. This is, again, these surveys, these political scientists are collecting information around the world, about these comparing countries with each other in these terms. Very satisfied and satisfied with the conduct of the elections and with the practice of democracy in general in the country. So what is that? 70% almost are satisfied with economic performance. This is political economists like to get data of this kind, and they try to predict, American political scientists like to predict elections on the basis of whether people think the economy is in the right place or not, whether the economy has improved over the last year or not. And, a lot of predictions, is the economy stupid? It's that kind of logic. But it's also all of these worries or certainties before the re-election of President Obama. Are the economic indicators going up or not? If they're going up, he's sure to win. If they're going down, he's sure to lose. People are really convinced about the power of that kind of variable. And so Indonesians, what's the national economic condition now compared to last year? The people who said better, very high, together with the no change, those are not people who would vote against an incumbent. They think that the situation is okay. This is even better. What is your expectation for economic performance next year? They think things will get better. So whoever they voted for, remember, and some of these people, of course, were voting for Prabowo and some were voting for Jokowi, but they thought that if their candidate won or whatever, next year it would be better than this year. So there is a general level of satisfaction with Indonesian institutions, economic ones in particular, political ones in particular, that we tend to forget. Especially, we tend to forget them in a world, we're in IRI today, we could be in NDI, where all of the real concerns are about this same kind of issue. Okay, what about corruption? What about bribery of local elections? What about that 86% of local bupatis, officials who are under arrest and so forth? Yes, I don't want to deny all that, but we need to start with this kind of foundation before we look at those things. Okay, satisfaction with President Yudhoyono's performance. Okay, this is also a heck of a lot better than President Obama. 60% of Indonesians in our exit poll are satisfied with President Yudhoyono's performance. How free and fair was today's election? What is that, 95% said that it was either very free and fair or free and fair. And this is the kind of thing that you need to be aware of also as Prabowo makes his charge. There is a general reluctance in Indonesia now, I think, to accept the charges that he's bringing, because the actual conduct of the election was done so openly, the counting of the ballots was done so openly, there were alternative counting procedures and so forth. But this is the foundation for it. When Prabowo says this is systematic deception and so forth conducted by the KPU, most voters are not going to believe that unless they have some harder evidence than they have now. How certain that the election will produce a leader who can make our country better? Very certain or certain. Again, this is both Prabowo and Jokowi voters, obviously. When did you make your presidential election choice? Now we're getting closer to the issues of how what the voters were perceiving and what they were affected by. Mostly, is this working? Yeah. Why is it not? Somebody else see where it is on the screen? I don't screen. Anyway, most voters, 60% of the voters, made their decision a few months ago. So the campaign was really directed against a relatively small number of voters. But 15% only decided since the campaign began. So these are the voters who were influenced by the campaign. And that's very important to have some sense of who those people were. Okay, this is why, or one of the reasons why, there was so much concern. This is not from the exit poll. Obviously, because this is trend. This is surveys that we have been conducting ever since April. Surveys that we've been conducting since April. And at that time, I think that's the first survey that showed a narrowing of support, or a diminishing of support for Prabowo and an increase in, a decrease of support for Jokowi and an increase in support for Prabowo. This was just after the legislative elections, and it looked like Prabowo was gaining quite a lot of steam, and Jokowi's rise, his seemingly inexorable rise over the last year or so, or even over the last 10 years since he first became mayor of Solo, had finally been stopped. We saw, and you know, a lot of us in the survey community also are saying to us, look at this dip, look at this dip. What does this mean? It means, we said to each other, that the campaign is going to make a big difference. And we think that in fact, that the campaign did make a big difference. But anyway, you can see here Jokowi's vote, or Prabowo's vote increasing almost to the point where it was equal to Jokowi's, but then it separated again. And so by the time of election day, and that's our exit poll results there, and I'll give you the quick count in a second. Here's the quick count, which was also conducted by SMRC, but there are several. There were about 8 of these quick counts that were all pretty uniform in their results. There were 2 to 4 polling organizations that produced quick counts that showed Prabowo winning, and as far as we could see, they were either incompetent or hired by somebody, can't say who. But anyway, this was the standard difference that we saw in the quick counts. And quick counts, again, historically, I don't know, we have NDI and IRI to thank here for starting the culture of quick counts. Maybe IFAS also did this as early as '99, maybe. And this really makes a difference, these quick counts, because everybody knows, you know, they can rely on them. And when Prabowo or any candidate, you have candidates, many candidates in Indonesia, of course, gubernatorial candidates and so forth, when they lose in the quick count and they claim the quick count is fake or whatever, we have a long history that says, no, that's not the way it works. And that's been a very important part of the culture now in this election that was so close. Okay. Now, the rest of the slides, I think, are about the stated and unstated reasons why people voted for one candidate or another. Again, we're asking people as they leave the polling place, why did you vote for the candidate? 35% say the most persuasive program. 32% say fights hardest for the little people. That's obviously a Jokowi campaign theme, and so that's probably mostly Jokowi voters. Although the other one, most persuasive program, Prabowo had a pretty good program out there, and in the debates, he was presenting his program all the time, you know, and claiming to have a kind of coherence that this is. He built his campaign on Jokowi not having the same kind of coherent vision that Prabowo had. And so some voters probably bought into that. Most persuasive campaign, 12%, followed family members, almost 12%. One of the things to be noted here is you don't get a picture here of a patron-client system, you know, in which it is local leaders who are telling people how to vote, and then they go out and vote that way, either a local religious figure or some local ethnic leader or whatever. Of course, there are many stories in the Indonesian press that make those kinds of arguments. Indeed, one of the places, where there is some concern about support, about the reliability of the results, are some polling places in Madura in which you got 0 votes for Jokowi and all votes for Prabowo. And one of the explanations given for this is, well, that's a local kiai, a local religious leader, and he told everybody to vote that way, and they did. And that might be true. Sort of independent, neutral people made that argument, and so it probably is true. But the other possibility, of course, is that somebody filled that out for them. But anyway, the idea in the Indonesian public, and we feel it too, I think, looking at Indonesia as a country in which there is a lot of village-level patronage and so forth, that there's probably a lot of influence from local leaders. We don't find that. We don't find that. We find voters deciding on their own with these kinds of reasons. Now, we have a number of these bivariate analyses, 2 variables, the variable of choose the vote, who you chose, and the variable, and another variable like a gender. And this shows that women voted disproportionately for Prabowo. Right? No, sorry. Women voted disproportionately for Jokowi, and men voted disproportionately for Prabowo. I'm going to argue in a minute that most of these things are close to being statistically insignificant. But we see this little difference, and so it's a question that we want to ask about. By age, the older voters tended to support Jokowi. Yeah. Older voters over here tended to support Jokowi. There was a pattern developing throughout the election campaign in which we thought that more urban people, and I've heard already a couple of people in this room say that they personally have friends who were going to vote for Prabowo and they couldn't figure out why and trying to convince them otherwise and so forth. There is a sense, we had a sense as surveyors, that what was happening throughout the campaign was that urban people, young, urban, educated people were disproportionately voting for Prabowo. And we couldn't figure out why, because of Prabowo's problems of being dismissed from the military and kidnapping dissidents and so forth. We thought that was so obvious, and you're going to see it is obvious, but still people were voting for him. And we think that was because Jokowi seems much more a small town guy, not an urban guy, not a big city guy who can maybe lead the country into the 21st century, can't speak very good English. Prabowo is fluent in English. He has a vision, he's traveled a lot, you know, that kind of thing. He's the son of Professor Sumitro, what can be wrong with that, and so forth. So there's a lot of feeling that Prabowo had much to offer, and that seemed to be attracting young, educated people in urban areas. Rural versus urban, the same as the last one. The rural is more Jokowi, the urban more Prabowo Hatta. Presidential choice by religion. Here's one where it really is clear that you can see the consequences of the campaign and also the general perception of the candidates and the political parties and so forth. Prabowo, it's not so much that I think that Prabowo was perceived as the candidate of Islam. It's more that Jokowi was perceived as the enemy of Islam by many within the pious Muslim community. And within the Christian community, of course, he was not seen as the enemy of Islam, but as the protector of Christians. And in Bali, too, as the protector of Hindus. There has been an increase in intolerance in Indonesia, in my view, over the last 10 years. President Yudhoyono has done virtually nothing to stop it beyond presidential rhetoric that never moves further into practice. That is in part the fact that, in part because of his coalition partners, the Islamic parties, especially PPP and PKS. The PKS is, as many of you know, the Muslim Brotherhood, the equivalent of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, the most active, dynamic Islamic party in Indonesia, and they push an Islamization agenda. And here what we see is most Christians saying, we want to stop that Islamization agenda, where Muslims, on the other hand, are divided about equally between the two candidates. But we'll see this play out. I think this dynamic, we'll see this continue to play out in the next 5 years, where it's been Muslims so far who have been gaining in ability to shift the Indonesian political system, pious Muslims, conservative Muslims, who have been pushing the agenda in their direction for the last 10 years. Now, I think we're going to see it shift the other way. And this is an indication of why. Presidential choice by ethnicity. I'll just point out that Prabowo was very popular in West Java. I think he won only two big provinces. I've forgotten what the other was. But West Java is the biggest province in Indonesia, and he got more votes in West Java than elsewhere. That's where the Sundanese ethnic group is located in West Java. Again, when I look at these figures, I think, oh yeah, this is mostly pious Muslims, I think, in West Java, who are thinking that Jokowi and the Megawati's party and so forth are the enemies of Islam, and so they're voting for Prabowo, not because of Prabowo, but because they're against Megawati. That's my knee-jerk reaction to it. By education, Prabowo Hatta better. The higher educated group more supportive of Prabowo Hatta. By occupation, blue collar, white collar, the same way. So all of these things tend to go in the same direction. There was something about Prabowo and Hatta that was appealing to this urban population, middle class, upwardly aspiring, want Indonesia to have a place in the world. And they saw Jokowi as a figure of the past and so forth, I think. We have to examine this more, but we can see this. Okay, this is kind of hard to read. I'll just tell you, the first parties here, this is PDIP, Megawati and Jokowi's party. This is PKB, which was Gus Dur's old party, and allied itself with Jokowi, as typically happens. This is traditional Islam, not conservative Islam, allying itself. And Nasdem is a new political party created by Surya Paloh. Hanura is not new now. It's the political party created by General Wiranto when he retired from the armed forces. And then I won't mention this one, PKPI, because it's just too small. But if you take those four political parties, that's the core of the coalition for Jokowi. And it's really interesting how much the voters, we're asking the voters, what political party did you vote for in the legislative election? We're asking the voters as they come out of the polling place, okay, what party did you vote for in the legislative election 3 months ago? If they are Prabowo Hatta voters, very few of them, 10%, voted for PDIP. 90% of them tell us that they voted for the PDIP, or voted for Jokowi. And 90% of the people who said they were PDIP voters voted for Jokowi, had just that moment voted for Jokowi. Of course, you say, right? This is partisan identification. Well, and you can trace that down through there. Almost every one of those parties, I think it's only this insignificant PKPI that doesn't fit this model, but every other one of them, it's really a substantial number of the voters for the relevant party, the party in the coalition for Prabowo or the party in the coalition for Jokowi, that voted for that candidate. And the reason that I say this is really interesting is because 10 or so years ago, maybe longer, maybe 15 years ago, as many as 80% of Indonesians identified with a political party. And this is very important to political scientists. We call this party ID, party identification, and we measure it all over the world and so forth. And it's a kind of independent thing, because why do you vote for the candidate you vote for? Oh, why did you vote for Obama? Oh, because I'm a Democrat, okay? That's party ID. And we thought we saw that also in Indonesia in 1999, but it has been decreasing. And today, there are only 20% of Indonesian voters who say that they identify. In our normal surveys, we say, okay, do you have a political party that you feel close to? And only 20%, and it's gone down fairly precipitously. Lack of trust in the parties. This is here, poor NDI and IRI, all those years of working with these parties to try to get them to be responsible. But for whatever reasons, these parties are not trusted by Indonesians. Individuals are much more trusted. And so, to me, like Jokowi, or Prabowo for that matter, very trusted by Gerindra voters and so forth. But for me, this is really interesting because it raises the whole question again. Maybe Indonesian voters are starting to think about party, or starting to return to party and so forth, because we see such a close identification here. Okay. Personal qualities. Care about ordinary people. This is an area where Jokowi really stood out over Prabowo, 87% to 77%. That's the first thing you can say. The second thing that you can say is, 77% of your surveyed voters said that Prabowo cares about ordinary people. That's interesting. I think what that tells you, we used to say about American voters, I don't know if we say this anymore, that there was a great bell curve, and most American voters were in the middle of that bell curve, and they might be a little bit Republican or a little bit Democrat, but the politicians tried to appeal to that middle. And you see something like that operating in Indonesia too. And once again, those of us who know about think we know about Prabowo's reasons for his dismissal and so forth in 1998 think, my goodness, can these voters have been, can so many voters have been supportive of Prabowo as this? But I think this is what explains it, that most Indonesian voters are in fact in the middle and are not prejudging people and so forth. So anyway, 77%. Intelligent, capable of leading to overcome the nation's problems. This is the same, and this is what I thought I saw in the debates too. I watched those debates. I tried to be a neutral observer of the debates, and I thought both of these guys really are showing their competence, and that's what I think most voters said too. Trust that deeds will match words. Here we get better findings for Jokowi than Prabowo, similar to the one before about care about people. And we think, in our final analysis, which we'll come to in a minute, we think that that's what pushed the voters in the end to prefer Jokowi over Prabowo. Campaign most frequently seen on TV. Prabowo is Mr. TV ads and has been since at least the last election when he was the vice presidential candidate. He's very good with TV ads and so forth. We saw last time in our surveys that people recognize it. People know that Gerindra or Prabowo, the candidate, had TV ads up, but it doesn't affect their vote. So there's recognition of the knowledge about the ads, but it doesn't have much influence. But here you really see people, once again, they are aware of Prabowo's ads. Internet, of course, many fewer people followed the campaign on internet, but that's growing. Most frequently seen banners, stickers, flags, a little bit advantage to Jokowi, which we think indicates that he had a better grassroots campaign. Jokowi had a little bit better grassroots campaign. Persuasion, were you persuaded? Have you been persuaded in the last 2 days to pick a candidate? Only 10% said yes, but of that 10%, 58% said that they had been approached by somebody asking them to vote for Prabowo. And of that 58%, or maybe the larger group here of the 10%, where you offered money or goods, this is the money politics aspect of this, and we get very low numbers. Once again, this may be a place where surveys don't work very well, where you don't, no, we have actually, don't laugh. We have other surveys in which you ask people, do you think it's easy for ordinary Indonesian voters to have their vote bought? And I think 40% is the last survey of that sort in which we've, the 40% is, yes, most Indonesians are willing to have their votes bought. And then you yourself, how about you yourself? Would you sell your vote? It's fairly high, 20% or something like that say yes. So there doesn't seem to be quite the stigma attached to vote buying as that we think in the United States. And this is something, Ed Aspinall at the Australian National University has been involved in a project in Central Java, Gajah Mada University, that's trying to look at this, not in the presidential campaign, but in local elections for regional executives and so forth. And there's an awful lot of vote buying that goes on there. So we have to, of course, we have to put all these things together, but we don't find that. Watch any debates on TV? Here's where I started out by saying the Indonesian voters are so terrific. As a parent, I don't know what the figures are in the United States, but they can't be anything like this high. 49% of our voters surveyed said they had watched several debates on TV. Which candidate was better? That to me, that once again, as I'm watching these debates and I'm thinking, boy, Prabowo is really doing well in these debates. He's introducing himself for the first time, Prabowo, to most of these voters, and he was doing well. So we see both of those. Oh, I'm sorry. The choice of president based upon whether the debates watched. Here, Jokowi does have the advantage. Yes, several times. Yes, all debates. But also the voters who didn't watch any debates disproportionately voted for Jokowi. So these numbers are kind of hard to assess sometimes, but it gives you some sense anyway. All right. Now, negative issues. There are several negative issues about Jokowi and then about Prabowo. In Indonesia, typically the distinction is made between black campaigning and negative campaigning. Black campaigning is lies. Negative campaigning is true negative things. And this was the characterization that what the opponents of Jokowi were essentially engaging in black campaigning. Did you hear that? Do you know or ever hear that Jokowi was born to Christian parents? That's a negative campaign. This is like Obama, born in Kenya to Muslim parents. All right. So we have a series of these anyway. So about 30%, about a third of the respondents said that they did know about that. And about a third of that group said that they believed what they heard. So that's significant in terms of ability to influence the outcome of the election. Okay, and this was probably, I said before, we need to talk a little bit about Prabowo's deficiencies in the campaign. And this we don't know this for sure, but this appears to have been organized out of Hatta Rajasa's office, this negative campaigning, the tabloid that claimed that Jokowi was Christian and so forth, Chinese. So this may have been, deliberate. This is swift boating in the American context. Jokowi is an ethnic Chinese. Again, a third know it, and a third of those believe it. Jokowi was involved in this is a very specific issue of corruption in Jakarta. Once again, the figures are about the same, a third and a third. Here, a lot higher. Jokowi dikendalikan. Jokowi will be controlled by Megawati. 45% had heard about that, and 58% believed it. So you would think that this would have worked pretty much against Jokowi, because most people presumably don't think that's a good thing. Jokowi should finish his term as Jakarta Governor. This is the most, I think this is the biggest figure. 56% agreed that Jokowi should have finished his term as Jakarta Governor. And of course, this was a big issue in the campaign from the Prabowo side. When we look at these figures, the people who don't know, 56% voted for Jokowi, while the people who knew, 53.1% voted for Prabowo. So you can see that there seems to be an effect operating here of people who think that it may be true that he's Christian, they voted for Prabowo instead. And again, this fits into this Muslim discourse. Jokowi is an ethnic Chinese, again, the same pattern all the way down, actually. Jokowi finished term as governor, that's the strongest one. 85.7% of our voters who strongly agree that Jokowi should finish his term as governor in Jakarta voted for Prabowo. And that may have been genuine, and independent. And so not so much that they're against Jokowi, but come on, he agreed to be governor of Jakarta. We elected him as governor of Jakarta, he should stay put. Then there were these negative issues about Prabowo. Do you know or have you heard that Prabowo was involved in kidnapping democratic activists? Now, this is where this distinction is made between black and negative. Those other things were negative campaigning, things that people kind of trumped up. That was black campaigning. This is negative campaigning in the sense that everybody knows this is true. Everybody who knows the actual history of these events knows that Prabowo was allegedly involved in kidnapping democratic activists in 1998. And there's a large number of people do know that and believe what they heard. Again, the media, Tempo magazine in particular, was really diligent in getting out this information and so forth about Prabowo in their news stories. Prabowo dismissed from the army because of kidnapping activists, and there was very much on the internet the document in which Prabowo, the military honor committee that recommended that Prabowo be dismissed. That document, a 4-page document, so easy for everybody to read, was widely circulated on the internet. 45% said they knew about it, and 64% said they believed what they heard. And do you know that Prabowo is temperamental, too emotional, or unstable mentally? And of course, once again, these are stories within military circles, and then because Prabowo comes from a famous family himself and was married to a famous family, of course, he was married to Suharto's daughter for a while. Of course, he's been followed pretty widely in the political public, and so stories about his temperamental behavior and so forth have circulated quite a lot for a long time. So, but that number is relatively low, but the number who believe it is relatively high. Okay, so there were, I think, 5 issues about Jokowi and 3 issues about Prabowo. In this case, it doesn't seem to matter, you know. Jokowi won among all of these people. It's only here, the Prabowo temperamental issue, the people who do not know that who voted for Prabowo. But the other ones, whether they knew or didn't know about the kidnapping of activists, about the dismissed from the army, they still voted for Jokowi. And so that may help also to explain the results of the election. Okay. I know I'm supposed to be stopping about now, and I'm getting close. Okay, so I just kind of summarize the findings. I went through a lot of those bivariate charts: gender and the vote, religion and the vote, and so forth. And you can see, and we do have to look at this some more, and we have to play with this and try to figure out social class, for example, we have to sort out a little bit more and so forth. So I don't want to make definitive conclusion, but so far as we can see, none of these factors really explain the vote in a social scientific, political scientific way. It's really much more these factors, the personal qualities, especially the trust and care for Jokowi. Both candidates are perceived as smart and competent, but it's Jokowi who was perceived. And of course, this goes back to when he was mayor of Solo and so forth. This is the image that he has been promoting ever since then. Also, the reason why I spent so much time on that complicated chart on the vote on the various parties in the coalition and so forth, this is also, I think, a pretty important variable. The coalition of the voters' party. So if you as a voter, if you had just voted for the Prabowo, one of the Prabowo parties, then you were much more likely to vote for Prabowo, and so forth. Again, seemingly obvious, but for political scientists, not. We see lots of variation. And finally, the campaign, where we said, these two candidates are getting closer and closer. The campaign is going to make a big difference, and indeed, we think that it did make a big difference. Okay, so my conclusions are: Indonesians are happy with the direction of their country. Americans should be so happy. They prefer democracy and are happy with the conduct of elections. They're also optimistic about the condition of the economy. And I was at the IMF this morning, and I made a point of saying this. Look, I understand that Indonesia has a lot of economic problems, but you also have a foundation here in which most Indonesian voters think that the economy has been doing pretty well, and this is something to build on in your advice to the Indonesian government, and so forth. Most chose their candidate before the campaign, but because the election was close, that small group, 15% or 20%, who decided late, are important. Jokowi was preferred for personal reasons. He also won the debates. Jokowi had more and better posters, banners, and other physical campaign paraphernalia. His media ads, Prabowo's media ads were more visible, but they did not translate into more votes. The black campaign against Jokowi was very influential, and they really scrambled in the last month in Jokowi headquarters to figure out how to counter that black campaign. And they seem to have been successful, as we see the vote difference widening after that time. Okay, that's the proof. You don't need that, right? But that's the proof, and we can talk about that later on as well. Let's see. So I want to say a couple of things just very quickly by conclusion. David asked me to say something about the state of Indonesian democracy, and I think I've done that satisfactorily. We really understand where Indonesian democracy is, at least in the minds of the Indonesian voters, but also to say something about what the implications are for policy. And I want to say just a couple of things about that. One, for religious tolerance, of course, the new government has to be watched. There have to be international NGOs and Indonesian NGOs and so forth paying attention to this issue. But I think there is a real possibility that the coalition that is going to support the Jokowi government will itself be more committed to religious toleration and will be able to use support from outsiders, civil society, domestic and international. Jokowi himself, when he was asked this question, he said, I've proved, I think I've already talked about this the last time I was at Yusindo. Jokowi said, I've proved that I'm committed to religious tolerance. Everybody knows about Ngurah Susan, right? Ngurah is a village head in Jakarta. Susan, it's a person's name. She is a Christian who Islamists, conservative Islamists, mobilized against to try to get her kicked out of office as a Ngurah in Jakarta because the population around her was all Muslim. And Jokowi as governor and Ahok as vice governor said no. And Jokowi brought that up in the debates to say, look, we are in favor of religious tolerance. What do they? And I'll say also on behalf of Yusuf Kala, in the first 5 years that he was vice president under President Yudhoyono, he was the most consistent defender of Muslim minorities of any politician in Indonesia. Of course, he had the position, he had the bully pulpit as vice president and so forth. And when things occurred, he was out telling local Muslims to cool it and to respect the rights of Ahmadiyya and Shia and so forth. So I think we will get good. Everybody has to watch what they do, but so far so good on both Kala and Jokowi on the issue of religious tolerance. On the issue of the economy, I think that we're probably going to get a similar mix, and we could talk about this later in the Q&A too, because I'm going to be very brief about this. We're probably going to get a similar mix of pro-state and pro-market policies. Indonesia, after all, is a country with a long history of protectionism and a nationalist ideology that supports protectionism for domestic as well as international reasons and so forth. But Jokowi compared to Prabowo, also, but maybe also compared to Yudhoyono, is a candidate who seems to understand the way markets actually operate. We don't always expect businessmen to understand how markets operate. Indeed, I remember when Yusuf Kala, as vice president, had to be pushed by real economists. You know, Yusuf Kala is a businessman, and big businessman, and he thought he knew more about the economy than economists, and economists had to sit him down at a particular point about the subsidies, about the fuel oil subsidies when he was vice president, and say, look, you can't do this. Here is what economists tell us we have to do in order not to have our budget destroyed. And he did that. He listened. So Yusuf Kala understands that economists have an understanding of how the world, in fact, works. And so I'm expecting that as vice president, he will be, the epistemic community of economists that has been growing in Indonesia ever since the Wijaya Berkeley Mafia days. That group of people are going to have more influence, I think, in this government, despite the fact that Megawati Sukarno Putri is the daughter of this virulently anti-capitalist Sukarno and so forth. Remember when Megawati was president also, she talked nationalism, but protectionism, but she practiced markets. And she appointed Budiono, for example, to a high position. So I think at any rate, there is a prospect here of moving Indonesian policymakers in a pro-market direction. I think we also see in Jokowi's first merit, he gave a marvelous acceptance speech, acceptance of the outcome by the National Election Commission, in which he was standing on the deck of a panisi, which is a traditional sailing boat from eastern Indonesia, and it may be something connected to Yusuf Kala that they picked doing that because Yusuf Kala is from eastern Indonesia. But he said, my first priority is going to be restore Indonesia as a maritime nation. Okay, well, we'll see how that develops. but it's been I won't talk about it in any more detail. There are a lot of challenges and so forth. But it's a very interesting initiative that he is taking. And it could mean lots of help given by foreigners to make that happen. All right, so, but whatever he does, and I guess this is the difference that I really see between Jokowi and Yudhoyono. Yudhoyono never really seemed to me to want to be president. I mean, he never seemed to want to rule, to govern. he wanted to be president. That was clear in 2004 and 2009. He wanted to be elected as president. But what he then wanted to do with that office of president, I'm struggling in this because I want to write about the Yudhoyono presidency. But I could not find any real vision. You go to them, and of course they got their reams of vision and stuff, but no real vision. And the very fact. So he wanted to reign almost like a Javanese king, but not actually to do anything. That was always the fear. And that's not what we're going to see from Jokowi. Jokowi as mayor of Solo, Jokowi as governor of Jakarta, the whole point has been policy, problem solving, and so forth. And that's also where Yudhoyono where Yusuf Kala differed so much from Yudhoyono when he was vice president, and why he was not selected for the ticket the second time around. So I think we're going to see a much more dynamic government, and at least those of us who wish them well can hope to help them push them along in the right direction. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
That's right. At least we have that. Yeah. We have at least a half an hour for Q&As, and IRI has decided on this sit-down format, which is fine with us. Is it on?
No, you have to turn it on.
It's on. Hello? Is it on? No. Hello? Better? Oh, okay. We have at least half an hour to our scheduled time for questions and answers. And of course, Bill has given us a lot of insights, some of which I think probably all of us will admit were surprising or not what we had expected. At least I felt that way about a number of his findings. So let's start with questions. Who would like to take the first? Ambassador Cleveland. Take the mic. Take the mic, please.
Paul Cleveland.
Yeah.
The numbers indicate, and you seem to have assumed all the way through your talk, that this group, Jokowi and company, are in fact going to end up as president and leading the country. There's a lot of concern that Prabowo may try to upset that through this court process and so on. Could you comment on that?
Yes, we'll know more. This is the wonderful thing about Indonesian politics. We'll always know more 24 hours from now than we know now. That's a standard response because events make it possible. But so I looked at the news reports a couple hours ago. As David said at the beginning, Prabowo has until tomorrow to make a complaint to the Constitutional Court. And he apparently plans to do that. And he has said they had a meeting at PKS headquarters, the Islamist Party headquarters. And it's apparently PKS people who have come up with these findings of discrepancies between the KPU results and the results that would show Prabowo the winner. And so they're going to take those results to the Constitutional Court tomorrow, presumably. And I'm not sure about Hatta Rajasa at the moment. He seemed to have bailed out of the campaign entirely as recently as 3 days ago. But yesterday he appeared at this meeting. He didn't make any statement or anything, but he was at the meeting at PKS where Prabowo and he were presented with this presumably counter finding. Well, now, everybody who has been following this, we have kawalpemilu.org, this guardthevote.org group that has been independently tallying the vote from the vote has been reported by polling place, has been reported publicly by the KPU. And so anybody can go in there and add it up. And they've been, this group, protectthevote.org, Kawal Pemilu, has been doing an independent tallying. And they came up with the same results as the KPU. Plus, of course, we had the quick counts before and so forth. So it's pretty clear what the actual outcome is. And the KPU says, we're ready. If Prabowo goes to the Constitutional Court, we have all of the data that will support our findings. So I suspect that's what's going to happen. You know, Prabowo is going to make that charge. I don't know who is going to be with him exactly. You know, whether Hatta Rajasa will stand with him, PKS, whoever. But he's going to make that claim to the court, and then we will see how that plays out. My expectation is that it's not going to take very long to play out. It's going to be like the U.S. Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore, one of whose arguments was the country cannot wait a long time, uncertain about who the president is, and therefore we have to make a decision quickly, the Constitutional Court will say. And so I think the KPU says they're ready. And so if the charge is made, they will have their counter evidence, and then we'll see what plays out. But that's it, as far as I can see. I mean, all of the other concerns about is Prabowo going to mobilize paramilitary and storm Jakarta and stuff like that, whatever probability there was of that, whatever, a month or two ago, no longer exists.
Next question. Yes.
Okay, is there a mic? Oh, hi. Okay, so Bob Pringle, former Foreign Service, et cetera, et cetera. There's been a lot of talk in the past, generally speaking, very soundly paced, that these coalitions were terrible, they were completely irrational, and they were distracting to voters because they didn't add up to anything, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like you to comment on what I'm about to say, which is that it seems to me there's a kind of feeling about this alignment that made a lot of sense, and it strikes me that what you're seeing is the shape of a sort of blue versus red, highly fuzzy-wuzzy, if you will, on both sides, but nonetheless, you've got looking at it, you've got on Jokowi's side, you've got the traditional old-style NU Islam, which oddly enough has become the more liberal branch of Islam. Right. You've got on the other side definitely the more fundamentalist brand of Islam. No hint of military affinities, of course, on Jokowi's side, a definite hint of military on Prabowo's side. You've got the people image on one side, the sort of populist idea, the authoritarian thing on the other side. You've got a basically liberal almost versus conservative, I'm not going to say Republican or Democrat in this this gathering, alignment there. Right. And I'm just wondering if you think that.
For me, I basically agree with that. Let me just, but you know, in a country that has 10 political parties and is a presidential system, there's an issue. You know, I mean, we have a big problem in our country, and it's gotten worse in the last several years because we have a divided House of divided House of Representatives that obstructs the president and everything that he wants to do. And this is the same claim that has been made in Indonesia about Yudhoyono, that he himself claims that he cannot do things that he wants to do because he's being obstructed by Parliament. I basically think that he has been looking for the easy way out on most issues, and that the fact of the matter is that he could have negotiated much better deals with Parliament than he in fact did, both within his coalition and by bringing in people from other coalitions and so forth. But so we will see. I have an ex-graduate student, Jayadi Hanan, who wrote a book on this subject in which he argues that there is plenty of data to show that, in fact, there is much less polarization and much less gridlock in Indonesia under Yudhoyono than there has been under Obama in the United States. This is another area. You know, 70% of Indonesians vote. What percentage of Americans vote? Gridlock is characteristic of the United States, but not of Indonesia. So there's a debate about this. But there are, I think, all kinds of ways in which a president can get what he wants out of the parliament in Indonesia. And we are going to see Jokowi trying to do that. And I'm talking with my ex-graduate student here about the various ways in which he thinks people are doing this and stuff like that. So there's the whole literature policy-oriented literature going to develop about this. I'll just add one thing to this, which is that to me, the fundamentalist Muslims, the conservative Muslims who were so much a part of Yudhoyono's coalition and constricted him and will not be a part of Jokowi's coalition, we think, although that remains to be seen how that develops. But the PKS, the Islamist party, the Muslim Brotherhood Party, was in fact the most obstreperous on this issue of fuel oil subsidies. President Yudhoyono was trying to reduce those subsidies so that his budget would not be totally eaten up by them. And it was the PKS, a party in his coalition, that was most standing in the way of that. So it was an economic issue rather than a religious issue on which I think the PKS caused the most problems within the governing coalition. So we'll see how that plays out. But again, it fits with what you were saying. This looks like it may be a right versus left coalition, if that makes any sense. By right, I mean pro-market.
Barbara Harvey, and then we'll go to others.
Barbara Harvey, also retired Foreign Service. I wanted to ask Bill about Yusuf Kala and Golkar. Some of the things I've read have indicated that possibly he's more popular than Abu Rizal Bakri within Golkar, and that he might be able to bring Golkar over to the Jokowi side of things. Right. What's your view on that?
It's mainly about political resources rather than popularity, says the political scientist. And of course, money is a political resource, but not the only one. And Abu Rizal Bakri has had more of that money than many other Indonesians, and he has therefore bought a lot of support in Golkar. But I think those days are over, and the reason why is in a democratic process, he couldn't turn that influence and money into votes, either for Golkar, which is just so-so, but especially for himself personally as a presidential candidate. So I think we will see him out very quickly from Golkar, and he will be replaced by somebody comfortable to Yusuf Kala. And Yusuf Kala doesn't want it himself. His answer is, I did that. Been there, done that, was Yusuf Kala's answer, but he wants to be vice president. Yusuf Kala really wants to be president, and my hope is that he will be careful enough to not get in Jokowi's bad graces as he got into Yudhoyono's bad graces by being too assertive. But he wants to govern. He wants to govern. That's what Yusuf Kala wants to do. He wants to govern the country. He's got lots of ideas and good negotiating skills and so forth. So he is one of the people who may be the good negotiator with Parliament. But anyway, his main resource now is political power. He controls, he is half of the team controlling the government. And Golkar has never been out of government. And this is a very powerful force. Those people are very uncomfortable with the idea of being in the opposition, Golkar. And so all this talk about permanent majority, that was what Prabowo was claiming a few days ago. We have a permanent majority, meaning our coalition is more than 50% of the seats in parliament. That was total BS at the moment that it was issued, and it's a lot more so now. So, we will see the bigger danger is there not being enough of an opposition. Too many parties joining the bandwagon.
Let's go to the back. Well,
Jerry Hyman from the Center for Strategic International Studies. I wonder if I could follow that question and ask you to give some perhaps thoughts or predictions, if you're willing, on the political parties generally, Gerindra, Golkar, and the Democrat Party, especially in light of your comments about party affiliation.
Right. The first thing to be said, I hope this is an answer to your question. The first thing to be said about political parties is that one of the main drivers of them is the appeal of the particular politician who leads that party. That's not the only thing, so I'll add something in a moment, but that's a very powerful driver. And so we saw PDIP, Megawati's party, got 34.7% of the vote in 1999. Roughly doubling the vote that her father's party, this is too simple, but in 1955, the PNI, the old party of Sukarno and so forth, got roughly 20% of the vote, and his daughter got 40% of the vote. The reason for that is because she was perceived as the next leader after Suharto. She was the opposition to Suharto. All of the opposition forces coalesced upon her. But she then drove the support for the party. Nonetheless, PDIP has some life of its own because it does indeed go back to the 1920s and so forth. But Gerindra, so far, has been almost entirely only the vehicle of Prabowo. There is the vice governor of Jakarta, and I'm sorry, I can't give you the right answer to this. I am clueless as to why Ahok, the vice governor of Jakarta, is a Gerindra person. I've got to find that out. I am also clueless as to why Ridwan Kamil, who is the very popular mayor of Bandung, is in this party. Because that indicates, that there is some independent reason for people to be in a political party. The Party Democrat was only SBY's vehicle. And you can see, what did it get? Less than 10% of the vote in this 2014 election. It got 20% of the vote in 2009, 7% of the vote in 2004 when it was a brand new party. And all that SBY needed was to have enough votes so that he could put together a coalition that would nominate him for president. That's what he did in 2004. And then by 2009, because he was such a popular president, these figures, this incumbency figures, he hasn't always been that popular. It goes up and down. But basically, he has been a popular president, and the popularity of Parti Demokrat, his party, is caused by his popularity. So that's a very important part of the Indonesian political system. Now we'll see with Jokowi, it's going to play, is Jokowi going to make PDIP more popular? Probably, over the next 5 years. Although I have to throw into this as well, the only reason why PDIP is not known for corruption right now is because it's not in government. That sounds cynical, but it's just a realistic position. There are lots of people in PDIP who are just waiting for the opportunity to become ministers or secgens and so forth in these various ministries, and they're going to milk the system for all they can get out of it once they do that. And so we will begin to hear stories about PDIP corruption. And then there's going to be this tension between Jokowi, the genuinely honest guy who's trying to govern, but is being confronted by his own subordinates or, members of parliament and so forth who are engaging in corrupt acts.
Hi, thank you. Sean Levine from Eurasia Group, the Indonesia analyst. It's good to see you again in
right.
D.C., not New York. Following up on that last question, given the market expectations of a Joko Widodo victory, and we'll probably see that before August 21st, a lot of people seem to set aside or seem to forget the fact that Joko Widodo has actually been driven to this rise of success, in a sense, by the elites. Yusuf Kala brought him from Solo. He was supported by Prabowo in Jakarta. How effective do you think Joko Widodo is going to be as president, considering he's going to have to face a very unruly parliament? I mean, outside of this coalition he has now, he has to bring on more partners. He's already said he's willing to do so. He doesn't have control of the Speaker of the House in Parliament now. Might not get that given the rule change that they made on Election Day. How effective do you think he's going to be actually in pushing for the reforms that are necessary for Indonesia? I mean, we're talking about fuel subsidies, unwinding regulatory uncertainty, both in the central government as well as the regional governments, which have a great deal of tension because of decentralization. Do you think he's going to live up to market expectations, or are we going to see a honeymoon period and then it's back to normal in Indonesia, very similar to Yudhoyono's last 5 years?
Yeah. Well, I would start that by saying that I don't think he's basically a product of the elites. Yes, in the Jakarta gubernatorial election, if he hadn't had some support from Prabowo's vice gubernatorial candidate Ahok and so forth, so that was a part of the coalition and so forth. But yes, you don't rise in Indonesian politics unless you have some support from somebody with money and other resources. But the main story about Jokowi, as I said at the beginning from Saiful Mujani, is that this is an ordinary guy who has been able to convince enough Indonesians of his political abilities to elect him president. And the main thing to see here is not a tool of elites, but somebody who has risen from below. Now, at the same time, that rise did look pretty meteoric, and it did appear to slow. You know, this is less, SBY had a similar kind of rise, starting at the time that he left Megawati's cabinet. And it was really remarkable to watch how SBY rose in the polls and so forth. Again, I think this was driven by, you know, Indonesia is a media-saturated place. So people are watching SBY all over the country. Supposedly, he was very attractive to middle-class, middle-aged ladies, right? I could never understand that myself, but then I'm not a middle-class, middle-aged lady. So, but you know, I mean, there's a lot of this kind of independent going on. This is not backroom kind of politics that explains much of SBY's rise. So, so Jokowi begins to tail off. And I think myself, I watch those debates, and that's my first real exposure to Jokowi too. And I think to myself, oh goodness, his voice is so flat. He's just so full of concrete type examples. He's not an inspiring speaker and stuff like that. And Prabowo seemed to me to be doing better at that. So this is. Jokowi seems to have done great as mayor of Solo. He seems to have been doing great enough as governor of Jakarta. You know, we could talk about particular issues where he performed well there. But now this huge challenge. So will he do it? Will he be able to dominate PDIP? Will he be able to sideline Puan, the daughter of Megawati, for example? I mean, there are all these kinds of issues. And I don't have any answer to those questions except so far so good. Basically, you know, I mean, if you think about Puan, you know, we take this on a day-to-day basis. Puan, Megawati's daughter, wanted to be his Jokowi's vice presidential candidate. She lobbied her mother. Jokowi lobbied her mother, and Jokowi won. Puan wanted. This is a pretty important right. I mean, who opposes mom? Especially in Indonesia, and mom was president. Puan wanted to be Jokowi's campaign manager in the presidential election. Jokowi went to Megawati and said no, and he won. So I read these are tea leaves, you know, and I look at those tea leaves and I think, aha, 2 points for Jokowi here. So, but we have to take this on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, right here. Yes, identify yourself.
Hello, I'm Kevin Lees. I run the website Suffragio about global electoral politics. I'd like to follow that up a little bit about Megawati's influence in the coming administration. You know, obviously we've just seen after a decade of pretty ineffective role in India how paralyzed government can become when you have a prime minister and a party leader sort of at contretemps. And in that situation, Sonia Gandhi, you know, very credibly had more power than Manmohan Singh. I don't think anyone expects that level of power from Megawati, but it's very clear that, you know, it was her decision in the spring to allow the PDIP to nominate Jokowi as the presidential candidate. Right. What role will she have going forward in formulating policy and making personnel decisions over the coming months? You know, as you say, these are tea leaves, but, you know, what insights do you have and what are your expectations of her role over the next 5 years?
Well, we have to look at the cabinet choices first to see that. She has some buddies in the military, for example, Megawati. Ria Mizard, who was promoted for many months as a leading choice for the vice presidency, probably because he's a buddy of Megawati's. Hendro Priyono, whose a record as an intelligence officer raises some questions. These people may get appointed to positions like Minister of Defense or something like that. And then if that happens, then we know right away that this is Megawati's influence. What I read is all of the debate is about the professionalism of the cabinet. So we're going to see now who gets appointed. The first news about the cabinet, incidentally, was that they were going to have an announcement of the members of the cabinet after Eid al-Fitr, after the end of the fasting month. And I thought, holy smokes, that's only 2 or 3 weeks from now. But the more recent thing, this is typical, right, in new government. Yusuf Kala said before inauguration. So that's more likely to happen in October, David. This is the latest on this, is that the announcement of cabinet, major cabinet appointments will take a while. But anyway, we're going to be looking at those. And if really the economics positions, if the economic type ministries are really held by the people that we think they will be, then it doesn't indicate one thing or another about Megawati's influence, because Megawati herself had such ministers when she was president. But it will at least indicate that the two of them are making good choices. Dede Basri, for example, Khatib Basri, what kind of position is he going to have? That kind of thing. But we just have to look. But so far, I see this anxiety, and I have many Indonesian friends. Well, Indonesian voters think that many of them think that Jokowi is going to be controlled by her. But I don't think so. I think he's going to be I think he's going to be his own person, but I don't have enough supportive data for that position yet.
I don't think Megawati's interested in policy.
So this is somebody you know Megawati better than me, right? I mean, you've spent more time with her and so forth than I have. I mean, I've been with her a couple of times, but I wouldn't say I'm a buddy of Megawati exactly.
I'm not a buddy, but I've seen her enough to know that she never
Cares about policy, right? Right. Good, Barbara. Thank you. That's a good intervention. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Charles Ham from Hope Worldwide. What intrigued me with this, as you mentioned, the tea leaves, I have a question. As we see that Prabowo as a man who was dedicated to become a president one day. Actually, even if, let's say, he failed, he actually is getting closer to his passion. So do you think with the coalition that they have, will they be able to create a power to change the election law and weaken Jokowi in the next 5 years? Let's say, Prabowo get married and looks good on the women and get more votes.
His ex-wife looks great to me still when she's up there on the
what's his chance?
platform.
What is his chance for 5 years down the road? What do you think? We all know all presidents elected,
right,
and their approval rating go down for whatever reason. Most presidents go through that. Whatever depends on the cabinet,
right,
as you mentioned.
Of course.
But what's your chance? What's the chance for Prabowo 5 years down the road? If he makes his moves rightly, he might be closer to what he really wants to.
Yeah. So, it's extraordinary that Prabowo has always, apparently, I mean, these are the family lore stories, L-O-R-E lore stories, that Prabowo's expectation was that he would be president. This was what his father wanted. It was like Joe Kennedy and Jack Kennedy, that kind of stuff, that kind of family dynasty. And so he was and then you throw a little Javanese mysticism in there, in addition, and they're really sure that they're reading talk about tea leaves, they're reading the signs from the stars and stuff, and he's going to be president. But he actually did come very close to achieving it. 47% is an amazing thing, to my mind, for somebody who has such problems in his personal past, that he could have gotten that far. So if he were smart, as you say, I think he should try to organize an opposition, a loyal opposition in Parliament, and then watch. It's like the Republicans have been doing, during the Obama presidency, organizing to take over when Obama is done, either 5 years or 10 years from now. If Prabowo, and that might be healthy for the country, to have an opposition that is, checking on what Jokowi is doing all the time. I don't think that's the direction in which Prabowo is heading. I think the direction in which he is heading is self-destructive. But we'll see how this, I don't have to elaborate on it any further, I don't think. We'll see how it plays out after tomorrow. But he needs to accept the system if he's going to play within it. I guess that's the short answer.
In the back.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Jeannie Nguyen with Voice of Vietnamese Americans. How would you see the new president, Jokowi Widodo, lead the country, and how would that impact the regional situation, since we're now expecting Indonesia to carry the leadership to support the peace and security of that whole region? And is role in ASEAN? Thank you.
Yeah, I think Jokowi's main interests are domestic. So we don't know very much about what he's going to do in foreign policy. There was a foreign policy debate, and Prabowo asked him the question about the South China Sea. We see that China is getting more aggressive, Prabowo said, in the South China Sea. What will you do about it if you become president, Jokowi? And Jokowi answered, well, to begin with, Indonesia does not have a conflict with China. Indonesia itself does not have a conflict with China. Now, I myself don't think that's right. There are conflicts with China, and I don't know why Jokowi answered that way. But anyway, most of the conflicts are, to be sure, with other countries, with Vietnam and the Philippines and so forth. And so what Jokowi said was, we would try to play the role of honest broker. To the extent to which we are a powerful, a large country in the region, we would try to be an intermediary between China and Vietnam, or China and the Philippines. Prabowo appeared to be pushing him to take a more aggressive, Sukarnoist kind of stance. But Prabowo himself didn't take that position. He just seemed, from the tone of his question, to be pushing Jokowi in that direction. And Jokowi answered with a soft answer. Now, they were also asked about how they compared their foreign policies with Yudhoyono's. And Prabowo answered that first, I think. And he said, President Yudhoyono says that Indonesia has 1,000 friends and 0 enemies. That's the cliche of Indonesian foreign policy under Yudhoyono. And Prabowo said, I agree with that. And this was a kind of narrative of Prabowo's debate style. He said, whenever I agree with anybody, I'm upfront about it. And in this case, I agree with Yudhoyono. And then, Jokowi said something similar. So I don't expect any great foreign policy changes. Yudhoyono, nobody, Suharto was in a way more active on the international scene, and Suharto, of course, was forever being pushed to be more active on the international scene, like by American presidents, among others. Yudhoyono, I don't think Jokowi is going to be much more active, because I think he's going to mainly focus on domestic things. But to the extent to which he is, it's going to be playing this kind of positive mediating role and so forth.
Last 2 questions. Ryan, and then you. You'll be the last.
Thank you. My name is Brian Kraft, the Asia Group. My question is that there's 2 things that I was most surprised about in your presentation. One was the age, and the other was the education, and their sort of
younger,
tendencies.
more educated voters voting for Prabowo.
Also, the rural-urban was surprising.
Urban.
Because I remember last time you were here, you were saying all of us were predicting just the opposite. We saw his gubernatorial campaign where the youth were rising up, and we expected to see the young, sort of newly educated Indonesians rising for Jokowi, but this seems to indicate just the opposite. So if you could speak on that a bit, I'd be...
Yeah, right. Me too. I mean, I was struggling with that for a long time as we were getting this data, not just this data, but survey data before this that is showing increasingly urban, young, educated people voting for Prabowo. And then we're getting a lot of anecdotal stuff as well, in which, Wayne Forrest, for example, at the American Indonesian Chamber of Commerce in New York, said he showed me all kinds of emails that he had been getting from young business people in Indonesia who want Prabowo. And the reasons are that they think Prabowo understands the world better. His English, his experience in the outside world. He has more of a vision about Indonesia's place in the larger world and stuff like that. So I think it was those things and therefore a kind of downplaying of his anti-dissident, his kidnapping of the dissidents past and stuff like that by those people. But to me too, I mean, it's almost... to me personally, if I were an Indonesian voter, I think that Prabowo's past would disqualify him as a candidate. You don't ask questions about what his policies might be and so forth. He's got such a problematic past that I wouldn't want to vote for him for president. That to me, that's as a sort of ordinary citizen, I look at it that way. But apparently, many Indonesian voters, urban, educated, young, didn't see it that way.
Alistair Bowie from George Washington University. Bill, when Saiful Mujani gave you your marching orders, you had to emphasize he was an ordinary person.
Right.
But he was also a two-term mayor of a mid-sized city.
Right.
And we're coming to 10 years since the adoption of direct elections for regional heads, governors, bupati, and wali kota or mayors. Does this suggest to regional heads, particularly those who've succeeded in being directly elected once or even twice, that the path to national positions of prominence, including the presidency, is much more open now than it was? And are they honing their skills at the regional level through the Pilkada process in a way that makes them more plausible candidates for the future?
Well, I just saw this figure from the Minister of Home Affairs that said that 86% of those people, the district heads and the county heads and the mayors, are under indictment for corruption. And I have to go back and look at that. Surely that can't be right, 86%, but I just saw that figure. So the other side of this coin is the weak legal system, weak judicial system, opportunities for corruption and so forth. You now have roughly 500 executives at that level, the district municipality level, some of whom are doing undoubtedly an exemplary job of leadership. That fellow Gamawan, who was the Minister of Home Affairs, was, he had that background himself. He was a successfully elected Bupati, I think district head of Solok maybe, for 2 terms, and then from that, Yudhoyono appointed him Minister of Home Affairs. So, there are different career aspirations that one can have from that level. And Ridwan Kamil is the other person in Bandung who people are talking about as an exciting mayor. So we'll see how that develops. But so far, Joko, I'll just say 2 things. But so far, Jokowi has been really the only one who has stood out in this extraordinary way. Whatever his personal characteristics are that made it possible for him to appeal to people in this way, he seems unique so far. So I'll say that. But I'm an American too, and we see where national politicians come from. They come from these kinds of backgrounds. Not so much mayors. Mayors seem to stick with their jobs. Bloomberg is suited to be mayor of New York, but not suited to be president of the country. But there may be more mayors in Indonesia who are seen as suited to be president. But with this direct election, now we have executives who have real experience at the local level. We have this debate in the United States. Isn't it better to elect a governor than a senator president because the governor has that direct administrative experience, that sort of thing. Indonesians are now going to be having that debate, and it has to happen that more and more people come into national prominence from that background.
Before we conclude, I want to announce that on August the 12th, we will have a distinguished panel of 3 Indonesianists. Bill Liddle will return. We will have Don Emerson from Stanford. We will have Tom Pepinski from Cornell, an up-and-coming distinguished Indonesianist, to update us on the situation as of then. So that'll be on the afternoon, I forget what day of the week it is, but the afternoon of August the 12th. So please mark your calendars. Now let's all show our appreciation to Bill for this very insightful presentation.
Can I comment to your question?